Who is? Computer, it's Anita. It's saying smart.
Good evening. Welcome to our work session this evening. I'm very, very pleased to tonight have our work session focused on what is so critically important, the reason that we are here as an organization, and that is student achievement. It's been very long, as everyone knows, 2 years. And during the last 2 years, while student achievement is always the focus of our work, it certainly was not always the focus of our conversations in light of the challenges of COVID and some of the issues that we'll be talking about tonight. So the data that we're going to be looking at tonight is out of date. It's out of date by necessity because during the last year and a half, we've not had the opportunity to do standardized testing as we have in the past. And while the data is out of date, it is never out of date to be talking about student achievement and the work that our professionals are doing in their classrooms. And when I raised this with our administrators, the idea of talking about student achievement was embraced, and for which I am extremely grateful. And they went to work, albeit with old data, to get the best possible look at how our students are doing and how we are doing as a benchmark as we look forward now to some normality as we head out into the 21, 22, and 22, 23 school year. So leading this effort was our curriculum director, Shane Cross, and he will be joined by our building principals tonight in telling a very good story about what is happening in our district, and also recognizing that there's always opportunity for us to do better. And I know that our leaders there will be very much focused on that in the coming weeks and months, and we hope years and years. So, Mr. Cross, thank you for your effort in coordinating this. And unless there are any questions from the board as far as context, we're very happy to have you begin the presentation.
Well, thank you very much. I'd like to thank the principals certainly for helping put this together and a joint effort here this evening in this presentation. PBAS data addresses grades 4 to 12, both PSSA and Keystone data. While students take the PSSA in 3rd grade, we need 1 year of growth data to be able for it to show up in PBAS. So this evening we have principals from 412, Mr. McGinty, Dr. Donahue, Mr. Hankney, Mr. Yellow, as well as reading specialists from the middle school, Mr. Brooks, this evening to help with this presentation. So what is value-added data? Simply put, it is growth data. In Pennsylvania, we use PBAS, or the Pennsylvania's value-added assessment system, which provides schools with grade-by-grade data for English language arts and mathematics, as well as science. Growth is really measured by current achievement compared to all prior achievement, with achievement being measured by either the PSSA or the Keystone exams. PBAS is not a test. It is a metric to evaluate growth by EVAS, the Education Value-Added Assessment System methodology, which is put together by the SAS company, software company, Tennessee, Ohio, us in Pennsylvania, South Carolina, and North Carolina are the 5 states that use it to comply with the Every Student Succeeds Act. Other measures that might be used for growth is SGP, Student Growth Percentiles, for example. In PBAS, there are 2 ways that growth is measured. The first is when states' assessments are administered in consecutive school years in grade levels, such as for ELA and math in grades 3 through 8. There's a growth standard that's used. The second is when state assessments are not administered in consecutive years, such as science class for grades 4 and 8, as well as the Keystone exams in literature, biology, and algebra 1. PBAS uses a predictive methodology. Instead of me trying to explain exactly what those methodologies are, I have a little short video for you that will get us started as far as what is that growth data. So that's an important piece, is that the colors don't indicate the degree of which growth occurred. The colors indicate the degree of which evidence supports growth. And of course, they're using thousands and thousands of students from across the state in this measure, across grade levels, across subjects. To recap, the PA.
If we got around for 1 second. Is this then going, so one of the things that would be most interested in trying to assess is how, what effect the last 2 years have had on student achievement. And I'm trying to understand from that explanation whether P.C.S is going to help me understand that or not, because it sounded to me like P.C.S is comparing them to other cohorts in the state. So I guess my question is, if everybody in the state is doing poorly because of the last 2 years, but if they're all doing poorly, sort of the same, will that be captured because they're being compared to everybody that's doing poorly, or is this in some way capturing how are they doing? And some students we wouldn't have this data on, but let's say older students, we had a record of how they were doing. Then 2 years of COVID happened, and now you're measuring them now. Will P.C.S tell us how they are doing as compared to themselves at Southern Lehigh, separate from comparing them to across the state over time? Or is P.C.S mainly just telling us how are our students doing right now in comparison to other like situated students across the state?
Good question. So the first is that the state has issued a notice to LEAs to be cautious about comparing the 2021 school year PSSA and Keystone data to previous and going forward through 2 years because of different variables that went into the testing environments. However, to answer your question very specifically, it is norm reference. So if there was a statewide dip, that would be reflected in the PBOS data. So the PA standard for growth, to recap, is the average achievement of a student group based on statistical analysis, so to your point, of all students in PA, of all years, all content areas for up to 5 years. So the standard of growth then is the green. So if you're green, you met the standard of growth in the state. And then of course, if it's blue, then there is evidence to support that there was growth, and if it's dark blue, there's significant evidence to support that there is growth. So moving into our data, achievement is on the right side of the slide, and growth is on the left. Regarding achievement on the right, you'll see that consistently in this school year, across all grades and all subjects, we have a higher achievement than the state average. In most areas where achievement does drop, since you'll see in grade 6 math as well as grade 8 math, you notice that the state's average also dips in those grades in those subjects. On the left side, that's the growth side, the dots represent the growth index, which is the amount of evidence that this group of students met, exceeded, or fell short of the standard of growth. So while you'll see in some areas there's evidence that we did not meet the standard of growth comparing it with achievement, the achievement levels are high in comparison with the state. One would expect to see variance in particular grade levels from year to year. So measures across all grade levels may be a more significant indicator of overall achievement and growth. So to illustrate this, I have included in your presentation that is in Word docs, scatter plots. In these scatter plots, the blue star is Southern Lehigh School District across all grade levels for the subject that's listed in the top right corner. So in this case, it's PSSA math. The yellow dots represent other other school districts in the Lehigh County, as well as our neighboring districts, the ones we share borders with. Scatter plots for PSSA science are not available in PBOS. So you'll see it for English, math, PSSA, and then the 3 keystone exams, literature, biology, and literature.
What grade are these, Mr. Cross, or is it not?
This is across all grades.
Across all grades, okay.
Scatter plots for science, as I said, aren't available, but it is for keystone exams. Across the board, you'll see that SLSE has high achievement. However, certainly there are some areas where some growth could occur. The principals are going to get deeper into their building level data, and they will be showing some other data points in addition to PBOS. But before I transition over to Dr. Donahue, I just want to say that you're going to see a pie graph to start each presentation. I want to make sure that you understand what that pie graph represents. So in PBOS, they separate student growth into 5 quintiles. The highest achieving quintile would be 5. The lowest achieving quintile would be 1. The middle achieving, right in the middle of the bell curve, would be 3. And so the pie graphs will represent the percentage of students that we have in our district who land inside of each of those quintiles. And of course, the color would represent the growth. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Donahue. We're going to go a little out of order because they have to get to conferences, but go on.
Mr. Cross, just to my other question, I just want to make sure I'm understanding the date, the years this was taken from.
This is the 18-19 school year.
Right, so this actually wouldn't capture anything with COVID.
Right, because we don't have PBOS data available yet
Okay.
for the 2021 DACA school year. This is actually the most recent data that's available in the PBOS system.
Right, so it's 2019, and it's looking back 5 to 2014 is sort of the data. So it's 2014 to 2019 data that's captured to give us our ideas of growth. Is that accurate?
So it's 1 year that you're looking at, but it uses all 5 years in its growth metric.
Previous to, prior to that.
But what you're looking at is the 18-19 year growth. There is a 3-year growth metric inside, an average over 3 previous years. But I think working it into the 18-19 particularly this year, and not going to the 3-year rolling averages.
Is it normal that PVAS you'd have to wait 2 to 3 years out to get results, or is this because we don't have data after 2019 that allows PVAS to provide current information about the district? Why does it have to look all the way back to, in other words, if this were normally, if COVID hadn't happened and you wanted to run a PVAS and print out and provide us that information, is it always going to have to look back 2 years, or would it normally allow you to have, and is that because we're missing data from COVID, or is that just how PVAS always is?
I follow you. You can go back 3 years in the system.
Mr. PSAs were canceled, and so you are correct. There is no data that was available, and PVAS would be far more current had we not had the COVID lack of data.
Yep. Thank you. Appreciate that.
I just have one other quick question. In looking at the slide that had with the achievement on the right and the growth on the left, slide, we see that there's big changes in grades 6 and 8, both at Southern Lehigh and at the state level. Can you just speak to that a little bit, because it just really jumped out? You know, that you see you go from blue and the first 2, and then you go in grade 6 and 8 into the red.
So as far as achievement, it has been known that the math PSSA in grade 6 and 8 is a very rigorous assessment, and the degree of which that happens at the state is still a conversation that happens often that I hear, but it is known that the PSSA scores tend to drop in grade 6 math and grade 7 math. As far as achievement, that represents our growth in comparison to other schools on that same test.
Okay, and is that true for for language arts too, because you see the same drop in the language.
I have not heard that from language arts.
But in any given year, when the scores for everybody go up or down,
Right,
it's an artifact of the test.
exactly.
They gave a hard test or an easy test.
Right. 'Cause
If one goes, it's across for everybody.
Right,
So unless everybody gets bad at algebra in one particular year,
right,
or really good at science, it's an artifact of the test.
right, and that's what it appears, right, because I mean, it's across the board, it's not, and we're still outperforming, you know, the rest of the state on those. I was just curious because it's such a dramatic shift. Okay, thank you.
So I'll turn it over, as I said, to the middle school is gonna start us out, because they do have to get back to conferences, so Dr. Donahue?
Thank you, Mr. Cross, and thank the board for their kindness in allowing us to go out of the batting order, and to Mr. McGinty for letting us step ahead of the IS. Because as Mr. Cross said, we're having parent-teacher conferences at the same time in the middle school. You'll notice that I think the next graphic. Will show the, if you take a look at this graphic, you'll notice very quickly, having had the colors explained as far as color coding goes.
Dr. Donahue, can you just pull the microphone closer to you?
Can you hear it better now? Yes? No? Okay. When we used to use the accountability model, change from achievement to growth, the middle school really had no troubles whatsoever with achievement. We receive their commendations on a regular basis. But when it changed to the growth model, we kind of perceived that we were going to have a competency concern. So to answer the questions as to what were we going to do about this to try to address the needs of every student who was in the building, we put our heads together and decided to come up with a data team. And the data team would involve the office assistant principal, the assistant principal, and the reading specialist. Now, the middle school data team was developed through the cooperation of the Allentown, Nazareth, and Parkland School District during the 16-17 school year. And the professional staff was introduced to the data action plan called DAP model during the 17-18 school year, just in preparation for the numbers that you're beginning to see. We've divided tonight's presentation into three: the context, and then an explanation of what exactly is the DAP team all about, so we can all see how we're trying to address any shortcomings or any areas of concern that we might feel is there. And then finally, we're going to take a look at the numbers. Mr. Hankey will be talking to us about what exactly the DAP team is like, and Mrs. Woods will be talking to us about where we are numerically and where we believe we're starting to see a trending in the numbers for the middle school. So at this time, I'm going to ask Mr. Hankey if he would please tell us a little bit about the actual DAP, the Data Action Plan model.
Good evening and thank you. I hope everybody can hear me. I want to take a little bit of time to explain this slide and the real DAP team model that we've designed and built over the last 5 years in the middle school. So as you can see, the DAP team is a data action plan team, and as Dr. Donahue explained, the three of us kind of run it, but it includes our teachers in our math, science, English, and social studies departments. And on a weekly basis, what happens is they meet to collect data, they analyze the data, and then they look for areas of concern and then take action. So over the last 5 years, what we've done is we've created a hybrid model, adapted a PLC model, which get our data, and then as a PLC model, we have discussions about best practices and what we implement so that we can fill the gaps in our students' education. What you'll see is we take data from several different areas, and we just talked a little bit about PSSA and Keystone, and as we said, that data is somewhat outdated. We get that data late. It's hard to change what we're doing day to day in our classroom based on that data, but it does give us a sense when we start the school year of looking at the students on any given roster and finding out if there's areas in any department where we're deficient. So what our staff does is they build a teacher data portfolio, which consists of the PSA data of every student they have on their roster. So their first kind of introduction to their students' data is based on the PSSA data and Keystone data that we have for that coming school year. Once they look at that data, now they start collecting data from other areas. I have them listed in the collection piece of this table. The first one I'll share is grades and common assessments. So over the last 5 years, we started to develop common assessments, and those common assessments really target the anchors and eligible content in SAS to determine if our students are actually growing and succeeding in those particular areas. Looking at that data, we're then able to spiral back into our curriculum if necessary, any information that students may have missed or may not be achieving at the level that we expect them to achieve. The next piece of data that we take a look at is our STAR data. And our STAR data, in compliance with what the district is doing, is given 4 times a year. And that helps in multiple ways. It helps us look at those anchors and eligible content over a quarterly basis, but it also helps us analyze how individual students are doing in their growth model, as Dr. Cross, or Mr. Cross suggested, with a student growth percentile score. So that's kind of a projection, which Mrs. Butch will explain a little bit about, but it gives us an idea, are the individual students growing at the rate that they are expected to grow at in English and math? And if they're not, we address that by spiraling pieces of that curriculum back inside of our lessons so that students can attain that level of achievement. And the final piece, which is kind of very important to us because this really allows our teachers to change their lessons on a day-to-day basis. The IXL program that the district is now using in math and language arts allows teachers to have real-time data on the success and achievement of their students. And it adapts to the individual students. So the more it's used, the better the software understands the student and their growth. That allows the teachers to dig in deeper and look at individual reports to determine if students are really making the growth that they're expected to make. So it also allows us to come into content meetings and then have discussions about best practices and about pieces of the curriculum that we need to enhance to make sure that that growth is there. And additionally, you may or may not know this, but the middle school has 2 periods a week where we remediate, enrich our students, and the IXL program is used to do that because it can do it on an individual basis very, very easily. So it gives real sets of data to teachers that they can use up front. So when we look at the collection process of our data, we have several points of data that are important to us. And the PSSA, PBOS data that we're looking at is important, but to change what we're doing on a daily basis, we really got to dig into the common assessments, the grades, the STAR, and the IXL. So it's important to look at all those things across the board. Now, Mrs. Butz will take a few minutes to explain exactly what that data looks like.
All right, thank you. So I know it's really hard to see up here, but you have it in front of you. We know, looking at our data, our PBOS data and such, that we do have some concerns. The first thing that we like to do is go into the Future Ready Index and kind of compare ourselves with other schools in Lehigh Valley, other middle schools, basically for the purpose of asking where we are we an outlier? Are we seeing similar numbers in other middle schools? Where do we stand in comparison? So you can see on this first slide our comparison with the 2 Parkland middle schools, Springhouse and Orfield. And in the area of language arts, Springhouse always comes out slightly above us. It's always been a trend. We've always been right behind them in the ELA achievement levels, but we are above Orfield. All of the schools there are above state average, and we are trending perfectly fine to hit that statewide 2030 goal. As far as math goes, you can see that we're coming out on top in comparison to Springhouse and Orfield. Again, we're all over that statewide average, but we know that we have some work to do in math. And then similarly, I compared us with the middle schools of East Penn. And again, if you look at Southern Lehigh on the left, we are coming out above both higher and lower McConchy Middle School in the achievement of language arts and in the achievement of math. So, you know, that's some good information that we have there. And then the final two, we always look at Nazareth because Nazareth, like our middle school, is a 7-8 building. So it's a nice apples to apples comparison. And they have a similar makeup in their district as we do. And we are coming out above them in achievement for language arts, English language arts and math. And then finally, Slocum Valley, they're our neighbors. It's someplace we tend to compare ourselves with. And you can see that we're happy that we are you know, coming out in that. But we still want to look at more specific data to help us drill down what the kids really need. The P.C.S data is really nice, but we like to look at more specific data at the middle school. So as you might have heard earlier, we use a program from Renaissance, in which we give screeners in both reading and math. The screeners do align with the state standards and provide us projected information. So when we take those screeners 4 times a year, it's essentially, in layman's terms, we're taking almost practice tests. So when students perform on their STAR now, it would be saying, like, if we took the PSSAs right now, here's how our students would be performing. And then it gives us a projection on their trend and how they would be performing on the PSSAs. We administer both of those screeners 4 times a year. There's a variety of reports that the system gives, and I've trained the staff at the middle school how to read the reports that are relevant to them. And it just allows our teachers to really peel back different layers to find the students' strengths and weaknesses. The information is then used to drive instruction. So students can revisit weak skills, they use them as warm-ups, they spiral them into their instruction, things like that. So now that you understand the background of how we use STAR, the purpose of the slide here, last year Renaissance conducted a national study on the impact of COVID with approximately 4 million students, who represented all 50 states. It is the largest COVID study to date that has been done educationally. We attended multiple webinars last year with Dr. Jean Kearns, who's the Vice President and Chief Academic Officer with Renaissance. What Renaissance did is they went into schools and of different backgrounds, all grade levels that STAR covers, and they looked at trends in scores from the prior years, and they predicted how students would, from different backgrounds, different grade levels, would have performed had there been no interruption. Had COVID never happened, here's how last year's students would have performed. Then they looked at how students actually performed in the fall, in the winter, in the spring of last school year. And then they determined the gaps in between where they were predicted to perform versus how they actually performed, to gauge the COVID slide, is what they called it, the impact of COVID. So this slide is for reading. And so you can see, we looked at the spring study, although I have our numbers calculated for fall, winter, and spring. But on the left-hand side, you can see that nationally, our current 7th graders and our current 8th graders, so I looked at their 6th and 7th grade STAR data from last year, we're looking at our current middle school population. They were expected to have a scaled score of 1,067, and the observed was quite a bit lower, 8 points lower. Same thing with 7th grade, they have what they expected based on the trend and what actually happened. So nationally, you can see that students in reading took a dip in this middle school, 7th and 8th grade level. On the right-hand side, you can see the middle school's average. We actually grew our students, even with COVID happening, we increased our levels 30 points and 10 points in both with our 7th and 8th grade students. And the same thing here, this is the math, whereas nationally in 7th and 8th grade, students dropped 15 and 11 points. So they're seeing a dramatic decrease in student achievement here and growth. But we at the middle school, and compared nationally, were able to grow our students 18 and 32 points. That was based on the spring data, so the end of the year data. Although we like that we're doing well nationally, we still feel that we could do a better job at the middle school with growth. So I have in here our STAR data, so you can kind of see another picture. I'm a very visual person. I just like nice clean graphs. So this kind of gives you another way to see what our STAR data has looked like from 2018, 19. I just kind of did 4 years looking back to around where that Pa.C.S data was coming in. And this is for STAR reading in the fall. And then I did another one for the spring. I'll show you that in just a moment. So you can see, if you look at the fall, for instance, fall of 2020, that blue line is our red line in fall of 2021. Those were our 7th graders and then our 8th graders. So we're not losing a ton of ground between those years. We're not gaining a lot of ground. We're kind of status quo at the moment. Still something we're investigating. And obviously math is always a different picture. It's the anomaly of math always seems to be lower than English. We always see a decrease. And that's why math tends to be a main focus in our building and ways that we can foster growth with the students. And then I also looked at our spring data, although there's that big empty spot there when we all went home for, we thought was 2 weeks. And that we would be back to normal, and then the world kind of fell out from under us, and we were all at home. So we didn't have that spring data that year, but this will give you a picture. It's a lot to look at, so I'm welcoming any questions later on if you have them about any of these. So drilling down even further, we began using a program this year called IXL. We used it in the past, but we really focused on using IXL this year for language arts and math. Again, as was mentioned, this is a diagnostic program, unlike STAR, which is a predictor. IXL diagnoses our students in real time and how a student is performing in language arts and math. It tells us where they are right now, today, with their understanding of the skills. So students work on practice and recommended skills in the program. The diagnostic score will tend to fluctuate. Now, we administer school-wide diagnostics in language arts and math at the beginning of every marking period. And so now that we just took our 2nd diagnostic, we took the 1st diagnostic when the students entered in the fall. 2nd marking period just began. We did our 2nd, and you can see here on this slide for math that from September to November in IXL, our 7th grade students are showing a 64% growth in their real-time diagnostic score, and 8th grade is showing a 77% growth. And with language arts, you can see that our 7th grade students are showing an 89% growth in their real-time understanding of skills, and our 8th grade is showing a 90% growth from September to November. As students, hold on 1 second. So the growth, because it's our 1st year using IXL, we're hoping to see a transfer in the growth when we do our 2nd STAR in the beginning of December, and then through to our PSSAs. Obviously, our students who are performing poorly or are making negative growth are on our radar. They're monitored on my end with my master spreadsheet. They're monitored by the teachers in their data portfolios. We look at students during our DAT meetings, and we also look at students during our MTSS meetings, where we additionally look at factors that might be affecting their achievement in areas other than academic, right? Because we know it's not always academic, there's other areas that might be affecting their growth and achievement. So, we're always looking for additional supports when we have students of concern. So that's just a quick snapshot of how we're using the data. And the last slide you see here, this is Southern Lehigh Middle School. It's how we ranked in the U.S. News and World Report, number 47 out of 877 middle schools. So a little bragging rights there for Southern Lehigh Middle School, and I think that's all we have.
Mr. Dim, if you really have a question,
Well, Mr. Cross, let me just, in light of the extreme enthusiasm that we're seeing from middle school, which we endorse in its entirety, we are unlikely to be able to finish even yet another school. So perhaps we could devote the next 10 minutes to question and answers for the middle school, and then we'll just have to be continued at a future meeting, if that's all right with the board. So maybe take some questions here? Yes? Okay.
So we will finish the next presentation at the next workshop.
Well, right, exactly. We have lots of good things to come up. We wouldn't want to rush good news. So with that, maybe we could take some questions for the middle school.
Mr. Dim?
Yeah, apparently very good news indeed. Dr. Mann, I did have a question about the STAR National Study. These aren't numbers, but it was the 2 pages that showed the expected scale scored nationally and compared with Southern Lehigh reading. Yeah, great, got it on. So a lot of this, the way I would read this, it seems like whatever the scaled score is kind of the key here to understanding how we're actually doing, which would be my way of looking at it. So one was the scaled score of the national study for both math and reading. Is that adjusted in any way for learning loss during COVID, or would that have been just a normal scaled score expected for the most part in any normal spring?
That was not adjusted for COVID, it was just a normal scaled score. They came up with the expected scaled score based on, they looked at previous STAR screeners, and they kind of created that trend line and said, okay, then here's where we would be, if we would follow that trend line, here's where we would be in the spring of 2021 versus because of COVID, where we actually were.
And then, so for me to understand better where Southern Lehigh really is, in any given year, would we always exceed the scaled score nationally? And so so our plus 30 to the scaled score on reading and plus 10 in the 7th grade, say 4 years ago, did we exceed the scaled score by similar measures, greater measures, or lesser yet measures, if that makes sense to you?
It does make sense. I'm not sure I can answer that. This is the first year they've done a study like this, so they've only provided this year's, or last school year's numbers nationally.
Let me just validate what I'm reading there, if I'm reading it correctly. There's the expected scale score, which is what you would expect the students to do, which is the plus 30.
Had there not been any COVID, they assumed that students in the spring, on average, would have gotten a 1067 on their spring STAR reading screener. But COVID happened, so we still took the spring reading screener. The national average went down to a 1059, ours was a 1097 at the middle school. So, and I'm comparing us across 7th grade to 7th grade, 8th grade to 8th grade.
So 6th grade performed 30 points better than expected,
Mm-hmm.
and 7th grade 10 points better than expected.
Correct.
Okay.
The reason that they hadn't had a study like this in the past is that the scale score really is a metric inside of STAR. It's really not often taken outside of STAR because in context, it doesn't have a lot of context. So what the scale score is that if you think of the standards as a continuum of learning, they have statistical measures that said that if a student scored at this particular scale score, there's a probability that they have mastered the standards that are prerequisite to that score. So the scores are really a statistical measure that they have based on millions of assessments over time of how many standard students have mastered based on that score. So taken out of context, it is a difficult score to put into conceptuality. the null curve equivalencies and SGP, those are some more reference that are the most important scores in the system and the percentile ranks.
I just wanted to say, it's exciting. Thank you for all of the work that went into this. That we're actually talking about education after a long time. So thank you for that, and it's encouraging to actually see the middle school data. Mrs. Gariello, Mr. McGinty, I'm sorry, I know you guys were prepared for this evening, but we will definitely look forward to the continuation of this and really important data and helpful data for us to move forward.
And thank you, Mrs. Woods, really, thank you very much for coming out this evening. Of course, the
I'd just like to echo that. Thanks and appreciation. This is really great information and data. And I think a lot of this speaks to the tremendous effort that our educators put in during COVID. And we're just really appreciative. And it's really nice to see the data and to be talking about education and academics. So thank you very much.
And I think we have to know, about 2 months ago, Mrs. Desai came to me and said, let's talk about education. And it was very much well received by our principals. And so I want to thank Mrs. Desai for that. And then to conclude my report, stenciled in on my workshop is construction update. So we have very little to report beyond last time, other than we have a meeting scheduled in the near future with the architects, try to understand how much of the work that has been done will be preserved, and we will be able to then use it in the future when we're able to move forward with some of the exciting projects we originally thought might be in the near future. So we're trying to do an analysis of the work that has been done up to this point, and then to be able to preserve that work so that it is some value to us in the future when that time comes around. Beyond that, there's little to report from last meeting. We continue to evaluate and to develop a phasing aspect of the project to identify greatest needs to move forward. We're also looking at grants from the federal programs to make sure that we are able to support some of that work through federal grants as opposed to local dollars. So that concludes my report. Mrs. Desai, thank you.
Why don't we just take a 5-minute break for the board members to, and then reconvene.
I was maxing the volume here. Then I realized you needed to be up there. You couldn't disconnect quickly. I apologize.